I didn't think a simple question could rearrange my entire life. But that's the thing about families. Sometimes the smallest sentence detonates the biggest silence. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind I used to measure my motherhood by. Roast chicken in the oven, the table set with the good plates I rarely touched anymore, and that familiar, hopeful flutter in my chest that always arrived when my son was coming over. I had been counting down the days like a teenager waiting for a first date, except my date was my own child, and the prize was a few hours where I could pretend the years hadn't slipped through my fingers. Ethan had texted on our way. Be there in 20. 2 lines, no exclamation point, but I still read warmth into them because a mother learns to survive on crumbs and call it a meal. I smoothed my blouse twice, checked the mirror once, and then checked it again. There was a streak of flour on my cheek from rolling dough earlier, ridiculous, because I wasn't baking for a holiday or a party just for them, just for my son and his wife. His wife! The word still felt new in my mouth, like something I hadn't fully earned the right to say. When the doorbell rang, I opened it too quickly, almost like I'd been standing there the whole time. Ethan stood on the porch with that same crooked smile he'd had since he was 10, the one that made me forgive him for everything before I even knew what he'd done. Behind him was Marissa, neat and composed, a little too put together for a casual visit. Her hair was pinned back in a way that made her cheekbones look sharp. She carried a small gift bag, the kind people bring when they want to appear thoughtful without getting personal. Hi, I said, my voice bright, my heart louder. Come in, I made your favorite. Ethan hugged me quickly, one arm, half a second, like someone patting a relative at a funeral. Still, I held on to it, even after he stepped away, because that was what I had left. Marissa leaned in for a polite cheek-to-cheek touch that never quite landed. Her perfume floated between us like a velvet curtain. Inside, I busied myself. That's what I do when I feel something I can't name. I poured iced tea, sliced bread, fussed with napkins. I asked about traffic, about work, about the weather, safe topics, harmless topics. I avoided anything that could catch on fire. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Ethan had once drawn dinosaurs with crayons and spilled grape juice and laughed so hard he snorted. Now he scrolled his phone once in a while, his attention split, his body present but his mind somewhere else. Marissa's hands stayed folded, her posture straight, her eyes scanning my home the way a realtor might, taking mental notes of what belonged and what was outdated. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself this was normal. Adults get busy. Marriages shift priorities. Mothers learn to adjust. We ate. We talked in polite loops. Ethan nodded at the right times. Marissa smiled when appropriate. I listened for warmth the way you listen for thunder on a muggy day, hopping it's far away, terrified it's coming closer. Then, somewhere between dessert and coffee, I decided to be brave in the gentlest way I knew how. So, I said lightly, stirring sugar into my cup even though I didn't take sugar. My spoon clinked against the ceramic, bright and nervous. Have you two set a date yet? For the wedding celebration, I mean. I've been looking at venues, just in case you want help. The sentence came out like a ribbon, soft, pretty, meant to tie us together. Ethan's eyes flicked up, then away, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. His jaw tightened just slightly. Marissa didn't blink. She set her fork down with deliberate calm and said, "It already happened." For a moment, the room kept moving without me. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the sink ticked. My own breath continued, in and out, because the body doesn't stop just because the mind has been shoved off a cliff. It what? I heard myself laugh, a small, confused sound. I waited for the punchline. For Ethan to grin and say, "Mom, relax." For Marissa to roll her eyes and tease me. For someone to explain that I had misunderstood. But no one corrected her. Marissa lifted her coffee cup and took a sip, as if she'd just told me the weather. Ethan stared at the table, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the wood. My fingers went cold around the mug. "Already happened," I repeated, slower, like the words might change shape if I said them carefully enough. "You mean the courthouse paperwork, like you signed something." Marissa's expression didn't shift. "We got married. It was small, just us, and a few people." "A few people." That phrase landed harder than the first. Us I could almost understand. Romance, privacy. The modern world loves a secret, but a few people? That meant there was a guest list. That meant there were names. That meant someone was chosen to witness what I hadn't even been told existed. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to fix it. Waiting for him to say, "Mom, I was going to tell you." Waiting for him to look like my son again. He swallowed. "Yeah," he murmured. "It was last month." Last month. The floor felt unsteady, as if my kitchen had turned into the deck of a boat. My mind started reaching for details the way a drowning person reaches for air. Last month. Which day? Where? How? Why? "How come I began, then stopped because the rest of the sentence was too humiliating to finish. How come I didn't know? How come I wasn't there? How come everyone else mattered more?" Marissa's eyes held mine, and I couldn't read what lived behind them. Not guilt, not triumph, just a kind of practiced neutrality. "We didn't want a big thing," she said. "No drama, no expectations." No drama. The word sounded like a label slapped onto my forehead. Like she'd already decided what I was capable of. Like my love, my excitement, my desire to celebrate my son was automatically a threat. I felt heat rise up my neck, but my voice stayed oddly steady, like it belonged to someone else. "I'm your mother," I said, and I hated how small it sounded. "Ethan, I'm your mother." Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were tired, not angry. That was worse. Anger would have meant he cared enough to fight. Tired meant he'd already made peace with my pain. "Mom," he said softly, like he was trying not to wake a sleeping baby. "We didn't mean to hurt you." Didn't mean to. That's what people say when they've already done the thing. When the damage is past tense and the apology is meant to seal the door. My throat tightened. Behind my eyes, pressure built, but I refused to let tears give them a victory or give me a weakness I couldn't take back. I forced a smile, the kind women learn to wear like armor. "Well," I said, voice thin, "congratulations then." Marissa nodded once, as if she'd been waiting for me to follow the script. Ethan reached for my hand briefly, a quick squeeze, a gesture that could be interpreted as comfort or as closure. Then he let go. The conversation stumbled forward after that, but it was like trying to dance after the music has stopped. I asked where they went for dinner. Marissa said a little restaurant downtown. I asked who was there. She listed names, 2 friends, her sister, a coworker, an efficient. Each name was a small blade. Not because I disliked them, but because each one represented a choice, a seat filled, a witness invited. I waited to hear a reason that would make this make sense. I waited for Ethan to say, "I thought you couldn't travel. I was afraid you'd be sick. I didn't want to disappoint you." Anything that suggested he'd considered me at all. Instead, what I got were phrases. It was easier. We kept it simple. We didn't want to deal with family politics. We wanted it to be about us. About us. As if I had ever wanted it to be about me. As if my excitement had been a demand instead of a devotion. I nodded at the right times, asked polite questions, even laughed once when Marissa mentioned the efficient fumbling a line. My body performed normalcy while my heart quietly cataloged every moment I'd been absent from without knowing. Every photo I hadn't seen. Every toast that hadn't included my name. Every ring slipped onto my son's finger while I stood in my kitchen a month later, stirring sugar into coffee I didn't even sweeten. When they finally left, hugging me quickly at the door, the house felt too large afterward. The silence didn't just return, it settled in like dust. I walked back to the kitchen and stared at the table. 3 plates, 3 cups, one empty chair that had existed in my life for years, the chair of someday. The chair where I'd imagined sitting at my son's wedding, dabbing my eyes, watching him promise his life to someone. I rinsed dishes slowly, as if moving fast would make the truth louder. My hands trembled under the warm water. I kept seeing Marissa's face, calm, unbothered. I kept hearing that sentence, "It already happened," like a door locking from the other side. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it was spontaneous. Maybe they assumed I disapprove. Maybe Ethan thought he was protecting me from stress. Maybe there was some explanation that didn't make me the last person to know my own child's life. But then the sharper thought arrived, quiet and poisonous. What if it wasn't an accident? What if it was a decision? I dried my hands and sat alone at the table, the chair creaking beneath me, and I stared at my phone the way you stare at an unopened letter that might ruin you. There were pictures somewhere, a date, a location, messages exchanged, people who knew. People who kept it from me. My chest tightened with a new kind of energy, less grief, more resolve. If something this big could happen in secret, what else had been happening without my knowledge? What else had I been politely excluded from while I smiled and called it adjusting? I opened my phone, scrolled to Ethan's last month of texts, and felt my stomach drop at how ordinary they looked. Grocery lists, work stress. See you Sunday. All of it sitting on top of a hidden wedding like a neat rug covering a trapdoor. That night, after I turned off the lights, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the dark living room and began to replay every moment, every pause, every time Ethan hesitated before answering a question. I thought about Marissa's careful politeness, the way she kept her words smooth and sealed. I thought about the names she'd listed, the few people who had been allowed to witness joy while I was handed shock. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone, not yet, but I was done pretending I didn't feel the knife. So I did the only thing a mother with a broken heart and a stubborn spine can do. I started looking for the truth, quietly, carefully, because if my son could get married without me, then I needed to know exactly who decided I didn't belong. Tomorrow I would call my sister, check social media, and ask questions I'd avoided for years. Tonight, I just listened to the silence and planned my first step carefully alone. The night after I learned about the wedding, sleep felt like something other people were allowed to have. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the past few years as if they were security footage from a store I owned but hadn't monitored closely enough. Somewhere in those ordinary days, something had shifted. Not exploded. Not shattered. Just shifted, quietly, politely, like furniture being rearranged while you're out of the room. Ethan and I had always been close. Not the suffocating kind of close, at least that's what I told myself. We were the kind of close that grows naturally when a single mother and her only son build a life together from scratch. When his father left, Ethan was 7. He tried to act brave about it, but he slept in my bed for months after, his small body curled against mine like he was afraid the world might take me too. Back then, loyalty was simple. It was him and me. If one of us hurt, the other felt it. If one of us won, the other celebrated louder. When he got into college, I cried in the parking lot after dropping him off. He hugged me hard that day, both arms, both shoulders, the way he used to when he was little. "It's not goodbye," he'd said. "You're my person. You're my person." For years, that sentence glowed inside me like a medal I hadn't known I was competing for. The drift didn't begin all at once. It never does. It started, I think, the night he mentioned her name for the first time. "Her name's Marissa," he'd said over the phone, casual but not too casual. "We met through work." There was a new tone in his voice, careful, measured, as if he were testing how I'd react. I'd smiled into the receiver. "Tell me about her." "She's driven," he'd said after a pause. "Independent." Independent. The word hung there like a preview. When I first met her, I wanted to like her. I truly did. She came to dinner in a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back neatly, a bottle of wine in her hand. She looked me in the eye when she spoke. She thanked me for cooking. She asked about my job. On paper, she was everything a mother could hope for: polite, intelligent, stable. But politeness is not the same thing as warmth. She never quite relaxed. Even when Ethan laughed at something I said, Marissa's smile stayed measured, as if she were keeping score in a game I didn't know we were playing. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. First impressions are unreliable. New relationships are fragile. Don't hover, I warned myself. Don't crowd them. Let them grow. So I did what good mothers are told to do. I stepped back. At first, stepping back felt generous. Empowering, even. I didn't call every night. I waited for him to reach out. I let weekends pass without asking if he'd come over. I told friends proudly, "He's building his own life." But somewhere between building and distancing, the phone calls changed. They got shorter. Hey, Mom, can't talk long. Work's crazy. We've got plans. Plans. That word started appearing everywhere, like a quiet boundary being drawn. Plans meant something I wasn't part of. Plans meant someone else had priority. I'd scroll through social media and see photos posted hours earlier. Ethan at a winery, Ethan at a friend's birthday, Ethan and Marissa hiking somewhere scenic. I wouldn't know about any of it until it was already over. If I mentioned it lightly, "Oh, that place looked nice," he'd say, "Yeah, it was last minute." Last minute. The phrase that forgives everything. The first time he missed Sunday dinner, he apologized 3 times. The second time, once. The third time, he texted 30 minutes before he was supposed to arrive. "Sorry, Mom, we're staying in tonight." Wait. That word was a line drawn in invisible ink. I tried not to react. I reminded myself that adulthood demands independence. I had raised him to think for himself, to choose his own partner, to build his own traditions. But independence and erasure are not the same thing, and I couldn't quite tell which one was happening. There were small moments that I brushed aside because they felt too petty to examine. Like the time I showed up to drop off leftovers, and Marissa opened the door just wide enough to stand in the frame, her body blocking the hallway behind her. "Oh," she'd said, surprised but composed. "We weren't expecting anyone." I laughed it off. I was in the neighborhood. She took the container without inviting me in. "Thanks, we're actually heading out." Behind her, I heard Ethan's voice, but he didn't come to the door. It would have been easy to read that as normal. Couples like privacy. Drop-ins can be intrusive, but something in her posture, firm, protective, lingered with me. Later, when I mentioned it to Ethan, he sounded irritated. "Mom, just call first, okay? We're not kids." Not kids. As if my gesture had infantilized him. I apologized. Of course I did. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first time he chose her comfort over mine, and whether that's wrong or simply marriage. Loyalty shifts when someone new enters the circle. I understand that intellectually. Emotionally, it feels like a quiet dethroning. There were other moments. The holidays became negotiations instead of traditions. "We're splitting time this year," he'd explain. "Her family in the morning, you in the evening." Evenings felt like leftovers. I told myself fairness was healthy, but I noticed that when her mother called during our dinner, Ethan answered immediately. When my phone rang during theirs, he let it go to voicemail. Was that possessiveness, or was it simply hierarchy evolving? Marissa never said anything overtly unkind. That's what made it harder. If she had been cruel, I could have defended myself. But she was always reasonable, always calm. Once, after Ethan and I had a minor disagreement about finances, he declined a small loan I offered to help with their apartment. Marissa pulled me aside in the kitchen. "We really want to stand on our own," she said, voice smooth. "It's important to Ethan." It's important to Ethan. As if I hadn't known him for 3 decades. As if she were translating my own son to me. I nodded, swallowing the sting. I was just trying to help. "I know," she said, "and that's generous, but sometimes help can feel like pressure." Pressure. Another label slipped gently into place. After that, I became hyper-aware of my own behavior. I edited myself before speaking. I rehearsed texts before sending them. I asked fewer questions. I made fewer suggestions. I didn't want to be the mother-in-law from cautionary tales. But the more careful I became, the more distant Ethan seemed. Calls turned into texts. Texts turned into emojis. Entire weeks passed, where our only interaction was a thumbs up. I would start typing, "Are you okay?" and then delete it. I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to confirm whatever narrative might be forming about me. Sometimes, though, I caught glimpses of the old us. One afternoon, he stopped by alone while Marissa was out of town. He kicked off his shoes, opened the fridge without asking, and sat at the counter like he used to. "Miss this," he said quietly. "Then come more often," I replied, half joking. He hesitated. It's complicated. Complicated. That word again, soft, evasive, heavy. What's complicated? I asked gently. He rubbed the back of his neck. Just balance, expectations. Expectations. Was I one of them? Before I could press further, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and stood up. I should head back. Back. Not home, back. I didn't notice the drift fully until it had already carried us into separate waters. I told myself I was respecting boundaries. I told myself love means letting go. But sometimes letting go becomes disappearing, and I couldn't tell which one I was doing. When they got engaged, it happened in the same understated way everything else had. A photo posted online before a phone call. I found out from a friend who commented, "Congratulations," beneath a picture of Marissa's hand, ring sparkling. I waited for Ethan to call. He did, hours later. "Sorry, Mom, we've been busy." Busy? I congratulated them, forced cheer into my voice, asked about plans. He said they hadn't decided anything yet. "We're keeping it small," he added. Small. That word, in hindsight, feels like a warning flare I ignored. I remember offering to help. "Whatever you need," I said. "I just want to be part of it." "You will be," he assured me. "You will be." Looking back, I don't know if that was a promise he intended to keep, or one he already knew he couldn't. There were signs, weren't there? The gradual tightening of their circle, the increasing emphasis on privacy, the subtle reframing of my involvement as interference, each moment small enough to dismiss, each shift easy to rationalize. Was I too involved? Did my eagerness feel like control? Or was someone else drawing lines and teaching my son to see me as a problem to manage rather than a mother to include? The hardest part is that I can't fully blame Marissa. She fell in love. She built a partnership. She protected her marriage the way anyone would. And perhaps, from her perspective, I was a shadow from a previous chapter, important, yes, but not central. Loyalty isn't infinite. It redistributes. Still, the secrecy of the wedding feels like something more than boundary setting. It feels like a deliberate act of avoidance. Avoidance of what? My reaction, my presence, my influence. Or was it resentment? Were there moments I'd failed to see her as the woman she was, instead of the woman who replaced me at the center of my son's life? The questions circle like birds that refuse to land. As I replay these memories, I can't escape the pattern. Less access, fewer details, more phrases like privacy and simple and just us. Words that sound healthy but in excess build walls. The wedding wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of years of slow repositioning. The drift didn't start with vows. It started with missed dinners, unreturned calls, polite smiles, and the decision, over and over again, to keep me slightly outside the frame. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand, I feel the weight of every moment I dismissed to keep the peace. Peace is expensive when it costs you clarity. If this was about independence, I could accept that. If it was about resentment, I could work through that. But if it was about control, about systematically redefining my place without telling me, then I needed to know. Because being excluded once is painful. Being erased gradually is something else entirely. I scroll back through old messages, old photos, old invitations that never came. I think about the engagement announcement, the word small, the phrase no drama. And for the first time, I allow myself to ask a question I've avoided for years. Was I ever truly welcome in their new life? Or was I tolerated until I became inconvenient? The only way to answer that isn't by guessing anymore. It's by finding out. And this time, I won't rely on what I'm told. I'll rely on what I can prove. The first photograph I found was posted 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. I stared at the timestamp as if it might rearrange itself out of mercy. It didn't. There it was, clear, indifferent, permanent. A soft-filtered image of Ethan and Marissa standing beneath an arch of white flowers, her dress simple and fitted, his suit charcoal gray. They were smiling the way people smile when something irreversible has just happened, and they're convinced it's beautiful. My son's wedding. And I was discovering it, like a stranger scrolling through other people's happiness. The post wasn't on Ethan's page. It was tagged in a friend's album, buried between vacation photos and a birthday party. No grand announcement, no dramatic caption, just, couldn't be happier to witness these two tie the knot. A white heart emoji, a champagne glass. Witness. That word stung more than I expected. I zoomed in, my fingers trembling. I examined the background, the angle of the light, the expressions on faces behind them. I counted. Marissa's sister stood to the left, holding a bouquet. Two of Ethan's college friends were near the back. A coworker I vaguely recognized, an efficient in a navy suit. I kept scanning the edges of the frame, as if I might materialize there if I looked hard enough. I didn't. My chest tightened, but anger hadn't arrived yet. It was something quieter, something heavier, humiliation. Because weddings are public joy. They are declarations. They are moments where families gather to say, we belong to each other. And here was proof that my son had declared something permanent without me in the room. I clicked to the next photo. They were laughing now, rings visible. Champagne flutes raised. Marissa's hand resting possessively on Ethan's chest. He looked happy, not coerced, not conflicted. Happy. That detail hurt the most. If he had looked uncomfortable, I could have blamed someone else. If he had looked distant, I could have told myself he'd been pressured. But he looked like a man exactly where he wanted to be. And I wasn't there. I set the phone down, then picked it up again. I searched more deliberately this time. Hashtags, locations, names. The ceremony had taken place at a small vineyard just outside the city. Intimate, private, scenic. A place couples choose when they want something just for them. Just for them. I called my sister first. Did you know? I asked without greeting. There was a pause, too long. Knew what? About Ethan's wedding. Another pause, then a careful inhale. I thought you were there. The words landed like a slap. No, I said. My voice sounded thin, almost brittle. I was. Oh, she whispered. Oh my God. I closed my eyes. When did you find out? They told us maybe a week before. They said it was very small. Immediate circle only, I assumed. Immediate circle. I almost laughed. You assumed I was included. I finished for her. Yes, she said quietly. I did. After we hung up, I sat very still. Immediate circle. I rolled the phrase around in my mind like a foreign object. If I wasn't immediate, what was I? I began making more calls. An old family friend confirmed she'd been invited but couldn't attend. It was last minute, she said. They said they didn't want to make a big deal. Last minute. Another cousin admitted she'd seen the photos online and thought I'd simply chosen not to go. You're not big on crowds, she said awkwardly. I figured maybe you didn't want the fuss. The narrative was forming without me. In one version, I couldn't attend. In another, I didn't want to. In yet another, I had been told and kept it quiet. But in the only version that mattered, the truth, I had been excluded. By the third phone call, anger finally broke through the humiliation. Not loud anger, not explosive, just a steady heat spreading through my chest. Because omission requires intention. Someone had made a list. Someone had decided who to call. Someone had weighed names and drawn a line, and at some point in that process, my name had been set aside. The question was, by whom? It would have been easier to blame Marissa entirely, the protective wife, the one who valued privacy, the one who had gently labeled my involvement as pressure. But the images contradicted a simple villain. In one photo, Ethan was leaning toward her, whispering something that made her laugh. In another, he was raising a toast, eyes bright. No one looked tense. No one looked coerced. If this was orchestrated, he was not a passive participant. That realization unsettled me more than the secrecy itself. I called Marissa's mother next. We had always been cordial but distant. She answered cheerfully. "Hi, how are you?" "I'm calling about the wedding," I said. "Oh," she replied, tone shifting slightly. "It was lovely, wasn't it?" I let the silence stretch just long enough. "I wouldn't know." Another pause. I assumed," she began slowly, "that you and Ethan had discussed everything." "We hadn't." "Well," she said carefully, "they wanted to keep it simple. No family politics, no pressure." There it was again. Table and stared at the blank wall in front of me. Every conversation added a new layer, but none offered clarity. Some people thought I knew. Others thought I chose not to go. A few admitted they'd wondered why I hadn't been visible in any photos. No one, it seemed, had asked directly. Because weddings are celebrations, not interrogations. And now I was the one interrogating Joy. I opened Ethan's social media page again. No wedding photos, no announcement, nothing. He had shared a picture of their dog 2 days after the ceremony. "Family time," the caption read. Family. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I zoomed into the vineyard's page and found a tagged image I hadn't seen before. Ethan standing beside Marissa's father, both smiling broadly, arms slung around each other's shoulders. The caption read, "Welcome to the family." Welcome. I read the words again and again. Welcome to the family. To which family? Theirs, clearly. But what about mine? I wasn't naive. Marriage shifts allegiances. It creates a new center, but it doesn't erase origins. Unless someone decides it should. By evening, my grief had hardened into something sharper. Not rage, not yet, but resolve. I replayed every conversation from the past year. Every time Ethan said they were keeping things small. Every time Marissa emphasized independence. Every time I apologized for wanting to be involved. Had I been slowly managed out of the picture? Or had Ethan been protecting something? Protecting her, protecting their peace, from what he perceived as interference? I needed to know which it was. Because betrayal and protection can look identical from the outside. The difference lies in intent. I texted Ethan. "Can we talk, in person?" The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. "About what?" I stared at the screen. "About the wedding." 3 dots, then nothing, then 3 dots again. "Sure," he replied finally. "Tomorrow." Tomorrow. I didn't trust myself to respond with anything emotional, so I simply wrote, "Yes." That night I didn't cry. I organized. I printed the Vineyards event page. I saved the photos. I wrote down dates and names. It felt clinical, almost absurd, as if I were preparing for a case rather than a conversation. But emotions distort facts, and I needed facts. The next afternoon, Ethan arrived alone. He looked uneasy, shoulders slightly tense, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Mom," he said softly. I gestured to the chair across from me. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had first asked about wedding plans, unaware that the wedding had already happened. The contrast made my stomach twist. "I've been looking into it," I began calmly. His jaw tightened. "Into what?" "The ceremony, the guest list, who knew?" He exhaled sharply. "Why?" "Because I need to understand," I said. "Was I forgotten, or was I excluded?" He flinched at the word. "You weren't forgotten," he said quickly. "So I was excluded." "That's not," he stopped, rubbing his face. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Silence filled the space between us. He stared at the table again, the same way he had the day Marissa told me. "We wanted something peaceful," he said finally. "No expectations, no tension." "Tension with who?" I asked. He hesitated. "With everyone," he answered weakly. "Not everyone," I said. "Your friends were there, her sister was there, her parents were there." He looked up then, frustration flashing across his face. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." He stood abruptly and began packing. "You've always been intense," he said, the word chosen carefully. You have strong opinions, you get emotional. I'm your mother, I replied. I know, he snapped, and that's the problem. The sentence hung in the air, raw and unpolished. My chest felt hollow. What does that mean? It means, he continued, voice rising, that everything feels bigger with you. Every decision becomes a discussion. Every plan becomes a negotiation. We didn't want that for our wedding. So instead, I said quietly, you chose to remove me entirely. He looked away. We thought it would hurt less, he muttered. Hurt less. The logic stunned me. You thought finding out afterward would hurt less than being included. He didn't answer. I searched his face for traces of coercion, manipulation, fear. I found none. What I found instead was conviction, and something else, exhaustion. This was your decision, I said slowly. Yes. The word was quiet but firm. And in that moment, the ambiguity evaporated. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't solely Marissa drawing boundaries. It was my son, choosing a version of peace that did not include me. The realization didn't explode. It settled. And what settled wasn't clarity. It was something deeper. Because if he believed excluding me was protection, then he believed my presence was a threat. And that fracture ran deeper than a single ceremony. When Ethan said, "And that's the problem," something inside me didn't shatter, it tightened. There are moments in life when you expect rage, but what comes instead is clarity. Painful, humiliating clarity. You're the problem, I repeated quietly, not as an accusation, but as translation. That's not what I meant, he said immediately, though his eyes betrayed him. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing a speech and suddenly realized it sounded cruel out loud. Then tell me what you meant. He ran a hand through his hair, packing again. He used to do that before high school exams, before job interviews, when he felt cornered by something bigger than himself. I meant, he said slowly, choosing each word as if stepping across ice, that things get heavy with you, emotional, complicated. Because I care, I asked. Because you don't let things just be. There it was. The accusation hidden inside a description. I folded my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. You think I would have ruined your wedding? No, he paused, but it wouldn't have been ours. The statement hit deeper than anger ever could. It wouldn't have been yours, I repeated. He nodded. It would have been about managing feelings. Yours, ours, everyone. And instead, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, you managed mine by removing me. He flinched again. Independence versus obligation. That was what sat between us. He wanted freedom from expectation. I wanted inclusion without condition. Somewhere in the middle, we had lost each other. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. But you did. I know. The quiet admission landed heavier than any defense would have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed again, faithful to its indifference. You've always been there, he continued, softer now. At every game, every graduation, every milestone, and I appreciate that, I do. Appreciate. Past tense gratitude for present absence. But, I prompted. But sometimes, it felt like there wasn't room for anyone else to matter the same way. The words slid under my ribs. You think I competed with her. I think you didn't realize you were. The honesty in his voice startled me. There was no malice there, just exhaustion. I searched my memory like a file cabinet thrown open in a storm. The engagement dinner, where I'd suggested venues before Marissa finished describing her ideas. The time I'd corrected Ethan's story in front of her, laughing, "Oh, that's not how it happened," because I thought it was harmless. The holiday where I insisted we stick to our traditions, even when she'd quietly mentioned wanting to blend theirs. Small moments, individually insignificant, collectively perhaps not. I was trying to stay involved, I said defensively. I know, he replied, but involvement can feel like control. The word control settled between us like a third person in the room. I controlled you, I asked, unable to hide the disbelief. You've always had strong opinions, he said carefully. You helped with everything. Decisions, applications, apartments. It was great when I needed it. And now? Now I need to make decisions without feeling like I'm disappointing you. The sentence pierced cleanly. Disappointing you. So that was it. Not anger, not hatred, not even resentment in its sharpest form. Fear. Fear of disappointing me. And instead of risking that, he'd chosen silence. I leaned back in my chair, the air suddenly too thin. When did I make you feel like your choices had to be approved? I asked. It's not that you demanded approval, he said. It's that you react strongly. If I chose something different than you expected, I could see it on your face, even if you didn't say anything. I opened my mouth to protest, then stopped. Because I knew exactly what face he meant. The tight smile, the brief pause, the too bright "oh," the subtle shift in tone that said I'm adjusting, but I'm not happy about it. I had thought I was hiding it. Apparently I was. So instead of risking that reaction, I said slowly, you eliminated the possibility. He nodded. And Marissa, I asked. He hesitated again. What about her? Was this her idea? He sighed. It was ours. That's not an answer. It wasn't a mastermind plan, he said, irritation creeping in. She just values boundaries, and I agreed. Boundaries. A word that sounds virtuous, but can feel like a wall. She felt like you didn't see us as separate, he continued. Like we were still an extension of you. The accusation burned. I gave you your own life, I said. You gave me everything, he corrected, but sometimes it felt like I owed you for it. Owed. The word knocked the air out of me. I never asked you to repay me. You didn't have to, he said quietly. Silence swallowed us again. I thought about all the times I'd reminded him, lightly, jokingly, about sacrifices. After everything I did to get you through school, you know I worked double shifts so you could. I said those things as shared history, as proof of love. Had they sounded like invoices? I wasn't keeping score, I whispered. I know you weren't trying to, he said, but sometimes it felt like I couldn't make a decision without factoring in how it would land with you. And so, he had made the biggest decision of his life without me. Because it was easier than navigating my reaction. The irony hollowed me out. You thought I'd make your wedding about me, I said finally. I thought you struggle with it not being about you, he answered honestly. The sentence hurt because it wasn't entirely false. I had imagined myself in that day. I had pictured walking him down an aisle of sorts, even if it wasn't traditional. I had imagined a speech, a dance, a moment where I could publicly acknowledge what we'd survived together. Yes, I had imagined being visible. Was that selfish? Or simply human? I deserved to be there, I said, my voice trembling now. I know, he replied, and for the first time, his own voice cracked. But I also deserved to start my marriage without feeling like I was navigating emotional landmines. Emotional landmines. The phrase cut deep because it suggested unpredictability, volatility. Was I that unstable? I asked. No, he said quickly. You were just intense. The word again. Intense love, intense pride, intense disappointment. I closed my eyes briefly. When he was young, that intensity had been strength. It was what fought for him when no one else did. What stayed up late filling out forms. What argued with teachers. What made sure he never felt abandoned. Now, that same intensity had become something to manage. Strength versus interference. I hadn't noticed the shift. You could have told me, I said softly. You could have said, Mom, I need space. I tried, he replied. I opened my eyes. When? In 100 small ways, he said. Shorter calls, fewer details, saying no, hoping you'd see it. I had seen it. I just refused to name it. because numbing it would mean admitting that my role was changing. And I wasn't ready. So this was easier, I asked. For that day, yes, he said. Long term, I don't know. The honesty startled us both. The room felt different now, not hostile but exposed. I'm hurt, I said plainly. I know. I feel humiliated. He winced. And I feel like you decided I was a problem, instead of having a hard conversation. He swallowed. Maybe I did. There it was. No villain, no conspiracy, just avoidance. I don't want to lose you, he added quietly. You already did, I replied before I could stop myself. The words hung heavy between us. He looked like I'd struck him. That's not fair. No, I agreed, it's not. Because this wasn't about losing him entirely. It was about losing the version of him that used to consult me, include me, need me. That version was gone. In its place was a man choosing autonomy over obligation. And maybe that was what I had raised him to do. I stood up slowly, walking to the window. Outside, the street looked unchanged. Cars passed. A dog barked. The world didn't care that something foundational inside this house had cracked. I don't want to be a burden, I said without turning around. You're not, he insisted. I don't want to be managed. You're not. But I was removed, I replied. He didn't answer. Because removal is a form of management. The crossroads sat quietly before me. I could defend my pride, demand apologies, catalog every sacrifice and insist on acknowledgement. Or I could acknowledge something harder. That love, when too tightly held, can feel like pressure. That involvement, when unbalanced, can feel like control. That my fear of being replaced may have made me cling in ways I didn't see. Turning back to him, I saw not a betrayer, but a son trying, clumsily, to step into adulthood without burning bridges he didn't know how to cross. I won't pretend this doesn't hurt, I said carefully. It does, deeply. He nodded. But if you think I can't handle the truth about my own behavior, I continued, then you don't know me very well. He looked up uncertain. I may be intense, I said, but I'm not incapable of growth. The room felt still. I don't want to compete with your wife, I added. I don't want to control your choices. I want to be part of your life in a way that doesn't suffocate you. He exhaled slowly. And that means, I finished, you don't get to erase me to avoid discomfort. You talk to me. His eyes filled slightly, though he blinked it away. I don't know how to do that without hurting you, he admitted. You're hurting me now, I said gently. At least let it be honest. Silence followed. Not the cold silence from before, but a fragile, thinking one. We stood there, two adults who used to be everything to each other, trying to renegotiate the terms of love. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know, I replied. The apology didn't fix it. But it wasn't empty. After he left, the house felt different again, not hollow this time, but unsettled. I sat back at the kitchen table, alone, the confrontation echoing in my mind. Was I the drama? Had my devotion quietly become dominance? The questions didn't have clean answers. Only space. And in that space, something uncomfortable began to grow. Reflection. The house was quiet after Ethan left, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. Before, the silence had felt accusatory, like it was echoing what I'd been denied. Now it felt reflective. Heavy, yes, but honest. I sat at the kitchen table long after the light outside shifted from afternoon gold to evening blue. My mind replayed the confrontation not as an argument, but as a mirror. You were intense. It wouldn't have been ours. I felt like I owed you. I had spent weeks framing the wedding as betrayal. A clean, sharp word. A word that made me the injured party and them the offenders. But betrayal implies malice. And what I had seen in my son's face wasn't malice. It was fear and exhaustion and a desperate attempt to claim space without detonating the bond that had shaped him. The question slowly changed shape in my mind. What was really lost? Was it the ceremony, the photographs, the symbolic moment of watching him say vows? Or was it something older, something I had been holding onto without realizing it? When Ethan was 3, he scraped his knee on the driveway. I still remember the exact pitch of his cry, high, shocked, indignant. He ran toward me, arms outstretched, blood mixing with tears, and I scooped him up before he even reached the porch. In that moment, I was everything: safety, authority, comfort, solution. He needed me. That need defined our early years. When his father left, that need deepened into something almost sacred. It wasn't dependency in a weak sense, it was partnership. We survived together. I filled out forms. He packed his own lunch. I worked late shifts. He learned to heat soup carefully on the stove. We were a unit. And when you build your identity around being needed, it's hard to notice when the need quietly transforms. At his high school graduation, he searched the crowd for me before walking across the stage. I stood and waved too enthusiastically, embarrassing him slightly. He pretended not to see it, but afterward he hugged me tight and whispered, "I knew you'd be here." Of course I would be there. There had never been a milestone without me. Until the wedding. But weddings are different from scraped knees and graduations. They are not about being needed. They are about being chosen. And perhaps that was the wound I hadn't fully acknowledged. I wasn't chosen. Not as a witness, not as part of the immediate circle, not as someone who could stand quietly without shaping the moment. I had lost the automatic role. I walked into the living room and pulled out an old photo album. The pages smelled faintly of dust and time. There he was at 5, missing his front tooth. At 10, holding a science fair ribbon. At 16, pretending not to enjoy the cake I'd baked but eating 2 slices anyway. In every photo, I was somewhere nearby, sometimes visible, sometimes just implied. Back then, tradition felt simple. Parents guided, children followed, milestones were communal, weddings were family events. But Ethan's generation speaks a different language. Autonomy is sacred. Boundaries are healthy. Privacy is protection. Tradition versus modern autonomy. Somewhere between those philosophies, we had collided. I closed the album and sat very still. Had I mistaken involvement for entitlement? I thought about the engagement dinner again, the way I'd leaned forward eagerly, suggesting venues before Marissa finished her sentence. I hadn't meant to override her. I had meant to help, but intention doesn't erase impact. Love can feel like support to one person and pressure to another. I remembered the first apartment Ethan and Marissa rented. I'd offered to co-sign the lease without being asked. "Just in case," I said proudly. Marissa had smiled politely. Ethan had hesitated. At the time, I told myself they were ungrateful for my generosity. Now I wondered if it had felt like insurance they hadn't requested. Strength versus interference. I had always prided myself on being strong, on anticipating needs before they were spoken, on solving problems before they surfaced. But perhaps the very skill that protected my son as a child had become an intrusion as he grew into a man. The wedding wasn't just about one day. It was a declaration. We are our own unit now. And I had interpreted that declaration as exile. I stood up and walked to the kitchen again, almost instinctively. The table where the confrontation had unfolded felt less like a battlefield now and more like a negotiation table. I picked up my phone. My instinct was to draft a message cataloging everything I'd realized, to explain, to defend, to contextualize my intensity as love born of sacrifice. But that would turn reflection into another lecture. Instead, I opened a blank message to Ethan. I stared at the cursor, blinking expectantly. Then I typed, "I've been thinking about what you said." I paused, deleted it, started again. "I'm still hurt about the wedding. Honest, but I don't want to lose you over it." My fingers trembled slightly. I'm learning that being needed and being invited are not the same thing. I want to be invited. I read the sentence 3 times. It felt vulnerable in a way I wasn't used to. I don't want you to feel like you owe me. I chose to raise you the way I did. That wasn't a debt. It was love. I hesitated before typing the next line. I'm sorry if my love sometimes felt like pressure. There it was. Not an admission of wrongdoing, but an acknowledgement of impact. I added one more sentence. I want to build something new with you and Marissa. Something that respects your independence and my place as your mother. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't demand explanation. I simply pressed send. The waiting was different this time. Less frantic, more grounded. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Thank you, Ethan wrote. That means more than you know. No long paragraph. No grand emotional release. Just 2 sentences. But they felt like a door cracked open, rather than slammed shut. The next step felt harder. Marissa. I had framed her in my mind as gatekeeper, as orchestrator, as the woman who valued boundaries over inclusion. But what if she had simply been protecting the life she was building? I opened a message to her as well. I know this situation has been tense, I wrote carefully. I want you to know I respect your marriage. I don't want to compete with it. The words tasted strange, humbling. I'm still working through my hurt, but I hope we can find a way to move forward with honesty. I hovered over send. Then I pressed it. Her response came the next morning. Thank you for saying that. I know this hasn't been easy. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to protect our start. Protect our start. Not erase me. Not punish me. Protect. The distinction mattered. I appreciate that, I replied. I hope next time protection doesn't mean silence. There was a pause. Then, that's fair. Fair. The word felt steady. A week passed before I saw them again. This time, they invited me. Dinner at our place, Ethan asked over the phone. Nothing big. Nothing big. But this time, the smallness felt different. Not exclusionary, intentional. When I arrived, Marissa opened the door fully. Not halfway, not guarded. Hi, she said, meeting my eyes. The apartment looked the same, but I noticed things I hadn't before. The framed wedding photo on the wall, the blending of their styles in the furniture, the subtle ways they had created a shared space. I swallowed the instinct to comment on the wedding picture. It was their memory, not mine. Dinner was simple: pasta, salad, wine. Conversation careful at first, then gradually warmer. At one point, Ethan reached for Marissa's hand unconsciously while talking. The gesture was effortless. I felt a flicker of sadness, and then something else. Acceptance. He belongs to another family unit now. That doesn't erase me. It simply repositions me. After dessert, Marissa cleared her throat slightly. We were thinking, she said, glancing at Ethan, of hosting a small reception in a few months, just to celebrate with extended family, if you'd like to help. If you'd like to help. An invitation. Not an obligation. Not a management strategy. An invitation. I met her gaze steadily. I'd like that, I said. Not because it restored what I'd lost, but because it acknowledged what could still exist. As I left that night, Ethan walked me to my car. I'm glad you came, he said. So am I. He hesitated. There's something else, he added, a small smile forming. What? He looked almost shy. We're not announcing it yet, but we've been talking about starting a family. The air shifted. A future grandchild. Another milestone. Another moment where tradition and autonomy would collide. I felt the old intensity rise instinctively. Advice, excitement, plans forming. Then I paused. I'm happy for you, I said simply. No suggestions, no expectations. Just happiness. Driving home, I realized something important. The wedding had felt like exclusion. But what was really lost wasn't access. It was the illusion that I would always be central. Motherhood begins with necessity. It evolves into invitation. And if you cling to necessity when the relationship has shifted to invitation, you risk losing both. That night, I stood in my quiet kitchen again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. Space for a new version of us. Exclusion had wounded me. Reflection had reshaped me. And pride, sharp and defensive, had softened into something steadier. Grace. The wedding had already happened. But the relationship wasn't over. It was simply changing. And this time, I was willing to change with it.